Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's Sam and Josh here. We're co-chairing the second panel of the day. I hope you all had time for a refreshment, perhaps a break, perhaps a stretch, perhaps a hobnob like Stephen had with him. I won't inquire as to your biscuit of choice, but we're back for the second panel and it's going to be packed again, full of our great panelists, looking this time from the perspective of employers. Now, sometimes I have to say, I'm in lots of conversations about youth employment, and sometimes employers come as sort of an ingredient rather than as main course to these discussions. And I wanted to put them firmly in the centre of everything in this panel. We're going to be hearing from business bodies, leading employers themselves about the recruitment of young people, supporting them, upskilling young people, particularly with a focus since the pandemic. So we will be thinking about the opportunities, some of the obstacles that have been occurring, and what have businesses been doing and what could they do more of around young people's sort of job prospects and skills. So Josh, do you want to introduce the panelists?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got wonderful panelists with us today. So we've got Nicola of Business in the Community. We've got Mary, who is Head of Global Workforce at the Strategy at Capita. We've got Karen, who is Head of Futures Careers at Virgin Media. And we've got Ian, who is the Director of Employment, Youth and Skills at the Department for Work and Pensions. I think we're going to hear from Nicola first, so over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for the intro, and really delighted to be here with you all today. So I work for Business in the Community, and for those of you who don't know us, we are a business-led membership organisation and a charity, and we're dedicated exclusively to responsible business. So we work with our businesses of all different sectors, all different sizes across the UK to really help them set ambitious targets for their responsible business activity, whether that's around inclusion, around skills, around climate action, around well-being. And then we hold them to account and we support them along the way. So I think that's the context in which I've been invited into this conversation. And Sam asked me to just say a few words around what have we seen from our members over the last 18 months or so as they've grappled with the challenges from the pandemic. And then what are the implications for that, and what are we asking them to do around youth employment, around employment skills more broadly. So I think the first thing I'd say in terms of the pandemic is that we've seen the impact play out very differently for businesses of different sectors and sizes, as you all are aware, I'm sure. But there are some really strong themes that are common across industry. A really strong sense of needing to look after the well-being of their people, not just their current workforce, but their future workforce as well, and particularly new joiners who might be joining in a very peculiar environment. Strong focus on inclusion and really ramping up of efforts around not just what an inclusive culture looks like within organisations, but how can they bring in a more inclusive and diverse talent pipeline. And then obviously the huge opportunity that's been unleashed by the rapid move towards a remote working culture for so many businesses, now really looking at how is that playing out and what does that look like for different segments of their workforce. And I was in a call even this morning with a number of businesses who were saying that they're really tuned into the potential risks around remote working or hybrid working, where they may have some of their more senior and experienced people working from home, where they're better set up, they prefer that, and then some of their younger or their emerging talent in the office, and actually really tuning into their responsibility as an employer to try and make sure that for their emerging talent that they're not denying them the opportunities that others have had in the past around interaction and learning on the job and exposure to colleagues. So there's a huge amount there. I'd also say it's not just, businesses aren't just grappling with the impact of the pandemic, they're also grappling with digital transformation, which was underway long before COVID and in some cases has been accelerated. Obviously, Brexit is huge in terms of particular industries suffering acute labour and skill shortages. And then with COP coming up in just over a week, there's a strong focus on businesses around the transition to net zero and what's the workforce that they need to make that transition as quickly as possible. And so within all of this, our focus at Business in the Community is on making sure that businesses are mindful of those young people, those job seekers, those learners who are most likely to be left behind, and that they're taking direct action to bring them into some of these opportunities. And we've got 3 asks for our members around this. The first is about removing recruitment barriers, whether that's the criminal records checkbox on job application forms that we're tackling through our Ban the Box campaign, or it could be jargon in job descriptions. And we've heard a lot of times from young people that we've worked with that this is really acute and can be impenetrable for some people taking their first steps in the jobs market. Or maybe it's grade criteria, and we've been pushing on this for a long time, and we saw the likes of BT moving quite fast on this at the beginning of the pandemic to remove some of the grade criteria requirements for some of their early careers pipeline in recognition of the challenges that young people are facing in education. And we want to see more of that sort of stuff through removing barriers. Our second ask is about developing skills, and particularly those essential transferable skills that we know are so important across all sorts of different industries and at every life stage. And we're working very closely with the Skills Builder Partnership and the Gatsby Foundation on this. And we've seen, again, good, strong action from members like Boots, who've incorporated Skills Builder into their pre-apprenticeship recruitment practices to help young people better prepare for the skills they're going to be asked to demonstrate at interview. And lots more stories that I'd love to share. But I'll keep this reasonably brief. So our third priority is really ensuring that businesses in everything they do, and there's such a range of activity out there, that they are reaching out and working in partnership with those organisations that can direct that support to those young people, to those job seekers that most need it. And in this instance, again, we've seen lots of great activity from members. Just to give one example, NatWest have started recently a social mobility apprenticeship in Bristol, working with an organisation called Leadership Through Sport and Business. And that's just one of a number of really fantastic examples we've seen from business. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're seeing, how we're responding, and some of the outcomes in terms of business practices. I'd love to share more as we go through the panel.
Thanks for that, Nicola. It was great to hear so many big business names doing some good stuff. So it's nice to hear reflections on exactly what young people tell us too. So next, I'm going to pass over to Mary, so I don't take up any more time.
Hi, thank you for inviting me along to talk about what we've been doing at Capita. So I'm really fortunate at Capita, we've been able to react quickly and adapt quickly to the changes that happened as a result of the pandemic. But very quickly, one of those things was that how do we react to the impact of the pandemic on young people? Even now, over 400,000 young people are claiming unemployment benefit, 75% increase versus pre-pandemic. And of those, 150,000 are long-term unemployed. Of those long-term unemployed, predominantly there's a huge percentage that are untapped talent from Black, minority, ethnic, low socioeconomic, diverse and disabled young people. And we really wanted to look at our recruitment practices and our offering to young people and make sure it was inclusive as possible and that we attracted diverse young people into our organisations from some of those untapped talent pools. So we've not only created a range of really new opportunities, including 100 Kickstart placements, T-level placements to help young people who've lost them as a result of the pandemic, apprenticeships and internships, but we've rethought how we engage and assess young people coming into the business. As recruiters, we have to be realistic that we haven't fundamentally changed the way we recruit in the last 30 or 40 years. So we're still recruiting into an industry that is biased towards white and male applicants. So we've thrown everything out. We've removed, for all entry-level roles, we've now removed the CV requirement and all experience requirements. So anything where we are offering real living wage or up to about 25,000 per year, we've removed all of that to make it truly entry. But what we've also done is recognise that for Black and minority ethnic candidates and those from low socioeconomic areas, we need to increase the amount of communication, and we're really proud to offer on all of our group roles and allyships. So somebody who is independent to the recruiters, that is there to help advise and support young people through the process. They can really get the best out of it and we can see them perform at their best. The main focus of all of our recruitment is on the behaviours that are required, that are important to success in that particular role, and motivation. We put a huge weighting on motivation, and there are tasks for young people to complete through the process that really test their motivation. They're not right or wrong, but they need to complete them to demonstrate, not only they get a chance to demonstrate what they can do, but demonstrate their motivation for the role. The other thing we've done is really started to assess how their behaviours impact on skills development. So like Boots, we're using the skills builder and we're piloting that, but using it in a much more coaching based way. So we're actually coaching based questioning techniques to actually draw out of young people how their behaviours impact their learning and their ability to develop those skills. So we're not expecting them to have skills at day one. We can build that. As long as they've got the right behaviours motivation, we know we can do that. And the other big change is that we've retrained all of our line recruiters on these programs, and we ask them to deliver all the assessment using something called unconditional positive regard, which means that no matter what the young person says, does, or how they appear, they give them unconditional regard and they just see them as a positive young person, and they are not swayed by any of that behaviour. What this has resulted in is 100% positive sentiment from both candidates and recruiters. Incredible result in terms of the quality of candidates we're getting through. 100% of apprenticeship candidates who've been offered a role have accepted and started, which for me is amazing, and they're really committed and positive about joining Capita. 50% of the offers have gone to Black and minority ethnic, with 20% Black, which is really good, and 10% offers and starts to candidates who've declared a disability and or a neurodiversity. On our Kickstart programme, 98% of Capita Kickstarters who've completed the 6-month programme had either made in employment with us, gone on to employment elsewhere, or returned to full-time education. So less than 2% have actually gone back into unemployment. Again, really proud of that. But not only have we done that, but we've looked at how we engage with young people in the workplace. And as Nicola mentioned, there's a huge impact on mental health and well-being of young people, and particularly thinking about home and hub working. And it's something I'm personally really passionate about. So young people's social development and their ability to develop networks has been impacted, and their ability to go into an office, have some of that social interaction, meet other young people, go to physical events rather than virtual events, all things that we benefited when we came up and through our employment. So we've just had just about a year in place a youth council at Capita, made up of 60-40 external and internal employees. Some of those councillors created a youth employee network group, which we've now fully adopted into the business, which enables young people to network and discuss and deal with challenges together. We're working towards becoming a youth verified employer with the youth group. And excitingly, next month, we'll be launching our pilot Safe Spaces to Work. So again, in partnership with the youth group, but something that we're hoping, if it works, will extend out to other employers. We'll be opening safe spaces in our London offices in Gresham Street and Victoria on the youth councils. And young people from both organisations can go to either space. It's dedicated for them. They don't have to have an excuse to go there or a reason, and just mix and network with other young people, work alongside other young people, and start to have that social interaction and development is really important. So again, really kind of looking at how we create the kind of new Capita, post-pandemic Capita, is a really positive place for young people. I was asked recently, and actually our Chief People Officer was asked, why we're doing some of this stuff. And it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for young people, for the communities, but also for our business. So thank you, and really happy to talk about some more of that as well.
Thanks so much, Mary. It's great to hear all the initiatives that you've got going on, and how much everybody is really pulling around young people. There's an infographic I saw the other day actually that pointed out that young people are actually 2 years behind. So year 11s now, the last time they had a full proper year in education was 2 years ago. So employers really recognising that is definitely going to be important going forward. But now I'm going to pass over to Karen at Virgin Media.
Hi everybody. So it's been great just to hear what Nicola and Mary have been talking about, and also share some experiences from our perspective. And just to give a bit of context, in our team, we kind of lead all the attraction, recruitment and all their development. So it's been great to sort of see that journey all the way through from candidate to them kind of coming off the programme at the end. So during the pandemic, we've been able to sort of see those trends throughout. I think coming back to, I guess, the point why we bring young people in. So at Virgin Media, it's very much around pipelining talent from a skills point of view. So with our gigabit rollout that we've got planned, skills are in high demand. I think Nicola referred to this as well with Brexit. It's potentially causing quite a few skill shortages in terms of some of our construction-based roles we've got. And we also know young people are brilliant from an engagement point of view, retention, that fresh thinking, things like ageing workforce and all those kind of good stuff that we all kind of talk about. And that we didn't lose sight of that in the pandemic. And I guess where some sectors have particularly declined and struggled a little bit, like the retail sector, I guess we were the opposite in the telecom sector. People were needing our services even more as more people obviously started to work from home in the last year. So we were in a really great place where we were able to continue to recruit, and we actually increased our apprentice hires by 120% this year. We've brought in about 400 in total. So actually our biggest year yet was actually in our pandemic year, and still here to tell the tale. So what we found is that, and I'm also a board member for the Institute of Student Employers, is that typically there has been a massive decline in kind of apprentice, intern and graduate numbers up to about 32%. But actually we were able to kind of stabilise our graduate and intern programme that is very much around a rotation programme. And then we also offer around 20 to 25 different types of apprenticeship roles. And we actually grew those during this year as well. So our programmes are very much bespoke to the needs of the business to ensure that we do put in the current and future capabilities that we need for our business to grow. And actually this year, a lot of things I'm reading at the moment is around the kind of the decline of the level 2 apprenticeships. And this year we actually 79% of our apprenticeships were actually in those spaces. So again, we really recognise, and I think linking into what Mary was talking about with qualifications, we've really wanted to make sure that we can support people during the pandemic, that to your point, Josh, as well, with people kind of feeling behind perhaps in some of that education, the knock-on effects of that in future years may come out. So some of our response have been is really we've been very intentional. We've completely recognised that we've needed to change some things. I think it's completely changed the early careers market from what I'm seeing. We went very to traditional based recruitment in place for a lot of years, and I think it works, but actually it's really sort of made us question some of those techniques and will things ever go back to the way they were. The way we worked was very much our apprentice and our graduate programme are aligned. All our programmes are about recruiting for potential, so they have the same behaviours. But what we recognised was that actually from a pandemic point of view in access, we had to really make sure that we considered all our different schemes and all our different individuals and programmes. A very intentional approach to having a look at everything that we do to make sure everything's fit for purpose. And at Virgin Media, we talk very much from an equity sequence lens, so putting ourselves in positions of those individuals. How would it feel for them? What do they want to see? How's it going to work? What impact does it have? So things like removal of CVs, adverse impacts, some of those kind of pieces we've been doing for several years. But what we did recognise is that people may not be able to do work experience in the same way. So we've moved questions. I think, Josh, you kind of mentioned BT earlier about the qualifications, and again we reduced a lot of our entry criteria across our programmes as well, which we won't go back on. That's definitely a move for forward, but again things that make you question why you've got things in place. We have a future careers committee which is made up of our grads, interns and apprentices, and we absolutely tapped into them, and they spent a lot of time. So when we actually recruited them, for those that were offered, we made sure that they had a complete engaged experience throughout that programme, and kind of we kept them up to date with all the comms in terms of what was happening in our own organisation. So whilst we were waiting for them to start, they knew exactly where we were from a working at home, going back into the office, things to think about. But in addition to that, we also built in coaching calls for our apprentices, so to make sure that at every stage they knew exactly what the virtual experience was going to be like at the assessment centre. They could ask lots of questions, and we would give them tips and guidance, because at the end of the day we're wanting them to do well at those assessment centres. But we also wanted to make sure that they could have access. So one of the things that we focused quite a lot on is that social mobility, and what we wanted to do was make sure that everyone could access that assessment centre fairly. So we kind of made a lot harder for ourselves, but made it possible that anyone could kind of join on multiple devices, so that, you know, if people didn't have an iPhone, for example, or a laptop, or, you know, couldn't have a quiet space, we could make it so that people could candidates could kind of be the best version of themselves on the day, really. And then from an on-programme point of view, we really partnered with training providers. So for the training providers who may be listening, it's just a massive thank you, really, because obviously we can do a great candidate experience, but then on programme we need to make sure that, you know, our apprentices in particular, where a lot of their time obviously on development could continue. And so we had 100% continuation of all our apprentice schemes. Everyone kind of quickly moved to an online version, and we've looked at the data and it hasn't actually impacted any of our results. And in fact, we've had more distinctions this year. So there's been lots of things we've done. And I think from a future point of view, it's definitely made us open our eyes to think about actually what will always stay virtual, what will go back to physical, and what's perhaps a hybrid model.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. I couldn't agree more with your point at the end there, looking at what needs to stay hybrid, what needs to go stay virtual, and what needs to come back in person. And that is something certainly young people talk about a lot, is that they want that mixture of in person. They can get all their information online, they can do all the virtual stuff, but it's that one-on-one stuff that really helps them develop. Now, I know Ian was having a couple of connection issues. Do I have you on the call? I do. Fantastic. Right then, Ian, over to you.
Thank you. If only I knew someone from Virgin Media who could help with my connection. Actually, it was, sorry, Karen, it was very, very well and truly a DWP technology fail. So thanks, Josh, for having me along for this. So I should say I joined DWP in April, having spent a few years before that in Department for Education and the Education Skills Funding Agency, working across a range of things to do with skills, on adult retraining, on apprenticeships, lifelong learning. So really interested, as you would imagine, on some of the theme that's been coming out today, I think, about how national policies fit together, and particularly joint working between the two departments. So we'll try and comment a bit on that. One thing that's been really consistent actually across that has been the ability to do it with learning and work, and I'm hugely grateful for the partnership that we've had with you and for the chance to join today. I'll keep my remarks short for three reasons. One is I don't want to be shouted at by Sam. Second is I'm a bit croaky. But third is you've already heard from our minister, and I don't think I could possibly describe what DWP is doing more passionately or better than she has done. And what I would say is that is an absolutely sincere sense of passion from her about this subject, and it's a huge pleasure for me and my team to support her on this agenda. I thought I'd just give you some reflections really on what I've encountered in my first 6 months in DWP and how it relates particularly to the way the department works with employers. So I think the first thing I'd say is, so when I joined back in April, job centres were mostly closed to the vast majority of their claimants. Not all, we'd stayed open to our most vulnerable claimants throughout the pandemic, but it was only in April that we really started to reopen job centres properly and prioritising young claimants first of all amongst that. And it was really striking in my sort of first few weeks when I was walking into job centres. Firstly, that sort of sense of the scale of growth amongst our work coaches. So, you know, as our minister said, we brought in 13,500 additional work coaches, a lot of whom had been unemployed themselves. But also what a supportive environment the job centre was, which I think was quite striking. But then the other bit that was hugely noticeable was just this vast range of provision that work coaches had at their fingertips to support claimants, and especially younger claimants. So, you know, for example, the fact that work coaches could spend more time with younger claimants through the youth employment programme, so that 13 weeks of intensive intervention face-to-face. There's job finding support for people who've been recently made unemployed, job entry targeted support for people who've been a bit longer out of work, including people who are on JSA as well as universal credits. We now have Restart for people who are longer term unemployed, iPairs for people with physical and mental health conditions, sector-based work academy programs, this huge wealth of things. And I think especially with something like the sector-based work academy programs, where 6 weeks of training, work experience, a guaranteed interview at the end of it, and as Claire was saying actually in the previous panel, a fantastic way of getting people into a much wider range of jobs than perhaps we thought about previously, whether it's, you know, HGV drivers, and there's been some great swaps activity with Eddie Stobart, adult social care, construction, some brilliant stuff with Balfour Beatty, manufacturing. So a much broader range, I think, than we've perhaps traditionally used swaps for. But I think then that takes you to the challenge Tony made in the previous session, which is, how do you make sense of all that provision? And I think fundamentally that is what work coaches are there to do. And we deliberately have a model in DWP that is about empowering work coaches to do the right thing for the person in front of them. And they're then supported by specialist colleagues around them, whether it's disability employment advisors or youth employment coaches, who can support on claimants with more complex needs, as well as being able to refer people through into specialist provision like the youth hubs, where we can bring, as you've been hearing already over the course of the day, not just, I'm pleased to say, from DWP, actually, but what a fantastic way that is of bringing the different services together that can help a young person get back into employment, and importantly into sustainable employment. But the other thing that really cuts across all of that is this sense of growing employer engagement. And of course, the really big scheme that I've deliberately not mentioned yet is Kickstart, which has been a fantastic way of really growing our employer engagement, I think, over the last few months. It's been I think, a really beneficial side effect from the programme, in effect. And I see this a lot when I talk to employer advisors in job centres, or the national employment partnership team we have in DWP, or the external partners we have, like the Kickstart gateways, that actually we've really widened, I think, the employers that engage with DWP. And it was fascinating for me to hear in a job centre on Friday, the employer advisor saying, look, we've had employers engaging with us through Kickstart in sectors that would never previously come into contact with the job centre, so creative media in that particular case. And that's fantastic, because we can now talk to them about swaps, we can talk to them about other opportunities to bring vacancies into the job centre. And I think that is a really exciting development, actually, for DWP and for our frontline services. But part of our job is absolutely to make all this provision that's available easy for employers to navigate. And I know that has been challenging. I don't think we've necessarily landed that perfectly. But some of the things that I think we've been doing have been quite interesting in that space. So I think the jobs fairs have been a really interesting example, actually, where we've physically brought employers into job centres, or created job fairs where we can bring some of our claimants to. So the employers can see our young claimants directly, can interview them on the spot, can appoint them on the spot for Kickstart placements, which has been a really brilliant development. And also using some of our digital tools. So we now have the Job Help website, and other Gov UK services that I think have been helping to try and stitch together the different offers that are available for employers. And that's important, because I think one of the really, I wanted to sort of finish by highlighting two really genuinely important but sort of growing priorities, I think, that I think will have a really significant impact on the way that we engage employers over the coming months, hopefully years. So the first is something that you heard about from Mims earlier, the DWP Train and Progress campaign, which is something we've been doing with our job centres to help work coaches focus more on the skills needs of claimants, so that claimants can better understand the skills they've got, how they can use them, where they could use them, as well as how to develop them, whether it's through foundation level training, through swaps, traineeships, apprenticeships, the lifetime skills guarantee on level 3 courses, and skills boot camps, and the flexibility that we've created in universal credit to allow our claimants to access those. And I think there's more we can do around that. And I think it's a really important, and as you would expect from someone from my background, a really exciting agenda to be working on. The second is progression. So I think it's really important that DWP isn't just a department that gets people into work, but it's a department that supports people to progress and find more work and better work. And the eagle-eared among you will have noticed in the Chancellor's announcement when he extended the plan for jobs a few weeks back, that progression is an area we're going to be putting more focus on over the upcoming spending review period, so that we can help more people who are in work and on universal credit to benefit from work coach support, career progression advice, and all those other forms of job centre support, working with local employers to make sure that people don't just get that first step into work, but are really able to progress through it. And I think that's going to be hugely important. So I'll just finish with the remark that it feels like we've built up a huge range of relationships over the last 18 or so very extraordinary months. And there've been ups and downs along that path, of course there have. You would probably expect nothing less. But I hope the relationships that developed are lasting ones that we can continue to build on, because that is the way that we will help more and more young people into work, and to do so in a way that helps them progress and have fantastic careers ahead of them.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. Good to get, I think, the employer's perspective and then get the government perspective with all those schemes and programmes sitting in the middle. And there's lots of chat going on Slido and lots of questions that I've been reading that we can pose. I'm going to pose the first one. Bessie, I'll go to you, Karen, and then Marie, and then Nicola and Ian, you can come in afterwards. You can all turn your cameras on if you want. The first question is, what does a good recovery look like? So where are we now going forward in terms of supporting young people into jobs and upskilling? So what would good look like in this recovery period? So Karen, I'm going to turn to you first, and then to you, Marie.
Yeah, so I think for us, what we've recognised is, because of the skill sets that we're looking for, is actually the whole talent strategy that we're utilising, and I guess how much, from a talent management point of view, with that kind of typical buy, borrow, build kind of approach. And actually what it's made people recognise is around that build strategy even more now. And one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on is around how much is around the external young people piece, but also in terms of some of our internal talents. So for example, since our merger in June with O2, so in our Virgin Media O2, they created a programme in the last year during that pandemic around basically how do they support young people in stores move into kind of head office roles and those pathways. So to me, there's a lot of opportunity that we need to focus on, yes, from an external point of view, and those people that may have been particularly impacted, who may be unemployed, for example, but also how do we continue to build skill sets with existing employees? And I think that combination together around looking at what are our skill sets, what is still being done in schools, colleges and universities, how do we bring it all together, and how do we give that extra support? Because regardless of the pandemic now, I think it's made employers realise where we can perhaps add more value into that education system, and things like Ian was saying, from a DWP, how can we kind of continue to work together to kind of, I guess, keep the early careers market forward thinking in what it's doing.
That's great. And that also answers one of the questions I saw on the chat from Andrea Barry, which was about retaining talent and upskilling talent, not just bringing people in. Over to you, Mary.
Yeah, completely agree with Karen. And interestingly, we've come to very similar conclusions at Capita as well. One thing that I started talking to the exec about is I keep saying to them, please offer careers, not jobs, and think about what you are offering in terms of the development of a young person and how they will grow a career potentially within or beyond Capita as well, and not just offering jobs. So we're really looking to significantly increase the number of apprenticeships that we're offering. So we start building, and we're hoping in 2022 offer 500 for the first time, and then up to 1,000. So really kind of starting to invest in young people. But I think that will get us out of some of these challenges with long-term unemployment amongst young people, but also in terms of the skills and the ageing workforce and where we'll start to see skills. We shouldn't keep relying on European and overseas workforces to come and kind of help us out when we've still got a lot of people long-term unemployed who, not because of their inability to do some of these jobs, but because of the way that we have engaged and assessed them as employers in the past.
That's good. And some really sort of big targets there as well. And I should mention, Marie, that in the chat, Dr. Doug Cole was really pleased to hear you talk about behaviours as well as skills. So a really big plus there. Nicola, was there anything you wanted to add on that?
Well, I suppose I would just sort of build on that theme around think about the progression piece as well. And when we talk to our businesses, we use a sort of a fairly broad framework of inspire, hire and grow. So I suppose when I think about recovery, I think we're urging businesses to start earlier. So think about how you're inspiring and developing skills in young people whilst they're in education. Join the dots, connect that to how you then hire. Don't operate that as a silo, you know, in a different department. Connect that to your recruitment, look at all of that sort of recruitment barrier piece, and then think about what's your growth plan for those young people. And that, you know, it's brilliant hearing Karen and Mary talk about that in terms of kind of that ongoing development. And I think so. It's that start earlier, follow through for longer. I think that's what we need to make that recovery more inclusive for young people.
Yeah, that journey. Ian, any additions there?
Yeah, I love that last theme, actually. I think that's a really important bit. I think that progression theme comes through really important. I suspect this is where, according to my official government line to take, I'm supposed to use the phrase "build back better," but I'll steer clear of that maybe today. But the important thing for me is that first of all, that we are finding ways to connect some of the different offers, and I do recognise that as a challenge, and it's something we've been really working at to try and get better with. But for example, it's a brilliant pathway, and I've seen it with loads of young people already, to come off a Kickstart placement into an apprenticeship. So not only are they going into sustained employment, they're going to sustained employment that gives them even more training, that then has a really fantastic career pathway ahead of it. And I think the more we can do to make that easier, the better, actually, because I think that sort of thing is hugely important. But I think also this point around employers investing in skills is clearly really vital, and kind of using the system that is there to do that really effectively. So there's a job, I think, for us in DWP, for our colleagues in National Career Service and DFE to help and support that really well. But there are some really fantastic ways now of bringing people into work in slightly different and more diverse ways than perhaps previously, and then once they're in work, to help them develop and gain the skills that will suit them really well in those jobs, but also give them that sort of transferability as well to sort of maintain careers when we know that the notion of a career has changed so significantly over the last few decades.
Thanks, Ian. I thought that last point in particular was really pronounced for us and our organisation. I'm really intrigued by this question that's come in, that's talking about lots of initiatives. We've heard from employers lots of their initiatives, and we've also heard from you, from government. So they're all great, but how do you engage the disengaged? How do you get the first people in? So if we want to go in reverse order, perhaps Ian? Yeah,
I mean, I guess engaging the disengaged is quite a sort of constant challenge, I guess, for DWP, isn't it? In a way, it's what our job centres have to do day in, day out. That is part of their bread and butter. But we've been trying to find different ways to go about that, I think, over the last few months. So let me do this with a really specific example. It might help. Take Kickstart, because I know there have been comments in the chat, completely reasonable challenges, I think, about some of the challenges we've faced. So it's been brilliant to have got nearly 90,000 young people into Kickstart jobs, but that hasn't been without its difficulties. And MFE isn't the only one, our minister isn't the only one to develop a few grey hairs, as she described it earlier, along the way. One of the things that we've done more recently is to advertise all Kickstart placements on the Find a Job website, which is in effect DWP's virtual jobs board. And that's been really interesting, because that's been a deliberate step to try and give a bit more agency to the young people who those vacancies are there for, to say, here is your way to go and search what Kickstart vacancies are available to you locally. And if you see something you want, here's how you get in touch with your work coach through Universal Credit, and they can then refer you to that vacancy and you can take that next step yourself. And I think that's been really important. But it also works the other way around as well. There was and I wish I could remember who said it. Someone made a really good point earlier on in the day about employers' expectations. So I think one of the things we found quite early on in Kickstart was often employers were asking for a lot from what they were sort of defining as the job description. And I saw this recently. An employer was telling me, I'm really frustrated. I haven't had anyone apply for my particular vacancy. And while they were talking, I looked up their vacancy on Find a Job, and the sort of skills definition required, it was sort of, very few people would have felt the level of confidence needed, I think, to apply for that, because it was just astronomical what they were looking for. And I think there is something about how you can use some of those tools to say, well, actually, if you change the way you were describing some of this, to better suit a young person who might be out of work for a few months, who might be really struggling with their confidence, might be really struggling to sort of articulate the skills that they've built up already. And actually, if you could change the way you do that, then someone's going to look at that differently and find a job. They're going to be more likely to get in touch with their work coach, more likely to put an application through. You'll fill that vacancy. Then you can start to stitch the system together in a bit of a different way. And we're really interested to see where that's going to take us, obviously now over the extended period of the Kickstart scheme.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. We've seen that with our own Kickstart that we've got here. So I could tell you stories about that all day. But over to Karen next from the employer side, really. So just to remind us about the initiatives, there's so many there, how we engage in those who aren't engaged.
Yeah, so I guess just reflecting on that question, I think for me and some of the things that we do at Virgin Media is, for us, our brand is really strong. A lot of people have heard of Virgin Media, but actually what we tend to find is that people might not always know what the roles are within that. You know, we're classed as the telecoms industry, so they might not see us necessarily at the forefront of, they might not always go, well, that's IT, that's technology. They might see us more as a media company, and there's those kind of things. So we've sort of been reflecting on that from a disengaged point of view, as well as other things like, I think was talked about earlier, for example, from an inclusion point of view. So one of the things I'd probably advise is around that data-driven approach. We absolutely look at every stage of all our processes. So whether that's how we attract, how we who's applying, how we assess to make sure that who are we actually targeting, who are we actually, like you say, engaging, who are we not through that process, and what we can kind of do there. And I think linking to a point I made earlier, aligned to that with then knowing the facts of where we're starting from and where we've done well and not so well, is then this equity sequence lens around, I'm not, I'd like to think I'm a young person now, but I'm probably not classed as one. So kind of what is it from a young person's point of view, that what do they want to see? What do they want to hear about? Yeah, the people that we're hiring, we're obviously doing something right and they're already probably engaged, but actually those that we're not tapping into. But I think some of it is around being transparent. I know it's always so much, just one example is like posting about salary information, like just posting some basic information. This is what it is. This isn't what your scheme is. To me, I don't understand why we wouldn't post for kind of those entry level roles salaries. And we actually went one step further, and we post. We've always posted our sort of starting salaries for all our programs, but actually we now post the progression salary. We post what their landing salary is likely to be, so that people can then make a decision on that. But as well as that, we're obviously then looking at what events we might need to go to. So 30% of the events we now go to are diversity and inclusion focus. So lots of things there, but hopefully a little flavour of what we've been doing.
I'm still on mute. It was bound to happen at some point. So yeah, thanks everyone. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go to Mary or Nicola on this occasion. We've only got a few seconds left, but just wanted to thank everyone and go straight back to Sam quickly.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, Mary, and sorry, Nicola, but that was a great session where, Ian, I didn't have to shout at anybody, did I? Which is even better. Well done, everyone, for keeping time. Really full of so much information and so much in the chat that I recommend everyone to look at. We're going to the breakouts now, so there's no rest for the wicked. The rest will come after the breakouts. Now, the information for joining your breakouts will be in the chat on Slido, and there'll be a link to the main events webpage on the Learning and Work website with the passwords and the Zoom details. So pick your breakout. They're all good topics, and see you there. And then we will have a 10-minute break before coming back to our keynote at 1:10 here. So go and join your breakouts now. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to the panelists who've done a great job. Okay.